What is a famous movie that you cannot understand the appeal of? First I watched the Seinfeld episode, and I only watched The English Patient many years later. I laughed a lot watching the movie, because I kept remembering the Seinfeld episode while watching it. That makes sense. Twilight was about a 100-year-old man that slips into an underage girl's room to watch her at night. But it's romantic somehow. I'd say Team Jacob. But then that weird fucker bonds himself to a baby, helps raise her, then hooks up with her cause she grows super fast. Very fucking weird story for teenage girls to have been into. I was a teen when it came out and watched all my friends and teachers pass around the book and rave about it. I started reading it but it didn't grab me. Then I heard the story from everyone and got turned off completely. And I love vampire shit. I was totally into the dark love thing back then. But these books I just don't understand. Why are the vampires sparkly? Why do they want to hang out in high school? Claudia from Anne Rice's books grew up mentally, why aren't these growing? They can reproduce, so shouldn't they have some sort of mental development past the age they were turned? Too many questions, too shitty of a story to even bother. Why too many middle-aged women thirsty over a teenager? There's a huge study behind why FSG got so popular. Some has to do with timing, riding off the coattails of Twilight, etc. It's not just middle-aged women are horny and leave it at that. Jenny Trout talks about it in length and what the appeal is, but fully acknowledges how messed up FSG is. Had it been written by a competent writer instead of L. James, maybe it could have been a much compelling story instead of mediocre Twilight fanfiction. My wife took me to see the third one in the cinema. The credits rolled and I realized I had no idea where I had been for the last couple of hours. It's like when you're driving and get into a deep daydream and next thing you know you're 10 miles down the road. We are talking about a franchise that went from we're a family and we're going to steal these DVD players to we're a family and I'm going to rope swing my car off a cliff Tarzan style to catch another car magnetized to a stealth fighter jet. What's so hard to get about that? It's funny that one was still in the realm of reality for an action movie. Then they had the fourth, which was like a glimpse into the next generation of insane super-powered monsters who drive cars. Hobbs and Shaw was hilarious because it was literally a superhero movie. It's an ode to mindless action. Michael J. Fox did an autobiography a while ago and he mentioned one actor who was seeking this one role that had meaning but realized that his most meaningful roles were the ones that got his audience to escape their lives for a minute. The Fast and the Furious franchise isn't going to be watched in film studies classes in a decade, but people love watching Vin Diesel and The Rock go ham for a couple hours. If you're asking why have people kept on board, it's complicated. The franchise is almost 2 decades old. The TVs they were stealing were CRT VHS combo TVs LOL. It just gradually got crazier and crazier each installment. I think the boiling frog analogy fits best, but the fans seem to be not only embracing but demanding the high-octane action. There are successful spin-offs FFS. There's no clear-cut answer other than people like ridiculous shit on screen and The Rock is a box office lock. Good supporting cast and not taking themselves too seriously really helps keep the core audience, even though the movies have changed so much over the years. At the risk of sounding tacky, but the series was cemented after the death of Paul Walker. There was a deep love for him and the franchise he built, that stopping would seem in some way halting the memory of him also. I'm always a little uncomfortable watching any cast interview discussing his memory because it's so intertwined with making more and more movies. You'd be an asshole for suggesting they should stop. They're great summer popcorn action flicks. Fast cars, hot bodies, action sequences, and over-the-top plots. Sit down, chill, turn off your mind, and enjoy the over-the-top spectacle. Just like the late 80s and early 90s when we had Arnold movies, Bruce Willis movies, and Jean-Claude Van Damme movies. I can't speak to the third film, they did split Mockingjay into two parts, yeah, cause I haven't seen it, but the first two movies are very faithful to the original material. There's some awkward tonal stuff where Jennifer Lawrence doesn't really express the emotional deadness and shell-shock state Katniss ends up in. Or, maybe she does, and it just isn't communicated well because we don't have an inner monologue to make it clear that that's how she's supposed to be. And it feels weirdly like a romance plot at times, which was not the primary focus of the books until book 3, where it kind of becomes central due to the plot of the book. The entire point of Katniss and Peeta's relationship in the first two books is that it's completely fake, until it suddenly isn't, but the movies play it as romantic anyway and don't really communicate that it's actually eating both of them up for completely different reasons. I wish they had deviated more, ironically, as Katniss is just not a compelling character on screen. I didn't really think she was in the books, either, as she's just kind of this lens to observe trauma through. She doesn't really have desires of her own, and doesn't employ a lot of agency outside of the occasional bit of spiteful anger/revenge. When you take away her inner monologue, though, she's just very bland. I don't know if that's on Lawrence or the direction given to her. I liked The Hunger Games, but it was kind of the series that everyone copied for a time, so I give that one some slack. I think the Maze Runner books actually came out before it, but I don't think they got popular until after Dystopia became a big thing. I'm really glad that whole trend died down, though. I feel like saying 50 Shades of Grey is kinda cheating, but I cannot grasp how there were that many horny middle-aged moms to make that series so much money. That film oozed shit, and the fact it's just a fan fiction of another shitty property irks me to this day. It's the allure of something forbidden, mysterious and maybe a bit dangerous. At the end of the day it's about excitement and that spark that's missing from a lot of people's lives. Also, dom/sub might be a fantasy that might be shared by a lot more people than they themselves might like to admit. Objectively though, they are pretty shit, no doubt. The porn industry is considered anywhere from a $6 to $67 billion industry, and is heavily geared towards men. I am not at all surprised that an erotic movie managed to gross 546-ish million. Women get horny too, and they were probably excited to see something erotic geared towards them instead of the typical plots you see in porn. What I love most about Moana is that it is not about the importance about finding Prince Charming, true love, or whatever. But instead about believing in yourself and being brave against all odds. I've delivered us to where we are, I have journeyed farther, I am everything I've learned and more still, it calls me. And the call isn't out there at all, it's inside me, it's like the tide, always falling and rising. I will carry you here in my heart, you'll remind me that come what may, I know the way, I am Moana. I like the point, counter to the always go with your feelings BS they typically promoted. Girl meets guy, she thinks she is in love, goes against her family because she believes that's true and eternal love, only to later see he's a manipulative bastard and that she had been blindsided by the first guy that paid attention to it. Frozen 2 also had a good subplot of don't follow your allegiances blindly, which I found valuable even though the movie was sub-par. Frozen is a case of expectations. Which is to say, that it feels very much like every Disney movie ever for quite a lot of runtime, which means I pretty quickly made some assumptions about how it was going to go. And then it didn't. Had I not walked into the theater with those trained expectations, I don't think the movie would have worked. It would have instead been a musical that forgot to musical after the second act, and it'd have one great song, and several okay ones to its credit. In a subtler way, I'd come to expect Disney movies to be bad. The good animated movies were Pixar and had been for almost 20 years. This wasn't true either, of course. Both Princess and the Frog and Tangled are both great films, and that's just from Disney itself. It isn't that the movie is great in a way that it truly earned in a vacuum, but that it was both different and better than I'd expected. So without those expectations, I'd agree that it isn't anything special. I can explain why I love it if it would help. I was raised when the pressure to be ladylike and accommodating was incredibly strong. Like, I legit thought I must be a lesbian because I thought it might be nice if it was ever, and I mean ever, my brother's turn to do the washing up. Sounds crazy now, but that was my upbringing. Even after I was married, I heard "I feel sorry for husband" a lot from a lot of different people because, gasp, he contributed to the household. Being myself was always a bad, or at least a "we still love you but you're weird" thing to lots of people. To this day I can't hear "Let It Go" without choking up. Be the good girl you always have to be, conceal, don't feel, don't let it show. Well, now they know. Right in the feels. Every time. Ultimately, Elsa's story is of a woman who finally lets her real self shine out, and it turns out to be awesome. I'm deeply glad for you that you don't get that and can see the whole movie as just a movie. Maybe it isn't as good as other movies, I can't judge, but just giving you some insight into why one person loves it with a fiery passion, smiley face. That's interesting how it makes you feel. I think the lyrics of "Let It Go" must have meant different things to lots of different people. For me, it's about masking my autism to seem normal in public. I still hide it as much as I can because I want to be liked and respected and not thought of as weird and childish. Pretty sure that ship has sailed, but I can try. But it's nice to sometimes listen to "Let It Go" and imagine just being 100% myself. And then thinking, God, no, face with tears of joy, face with tears of joy. Not to get off topic, but getting to a suitable level of masking my autism has objectively made my life a billion times better. I literally do not get all this "autism is a superpower" propaganda. The first 15 years of my life was pure, uncut anxiety. I went to bed every night and panic attacked myself to sleep. I chewed on my t-shirt until it was soaked all the way down the front, shook my hands and rolled my eyes back into my head until I was frenzied and had to lay on the ground, in public, until I was 10. I had meltdowns if I had to wear a different shirt than I was used to. One shirt, I wore one shirt to the entirety of 5th grade. I would just stare at people well into high school. My hair was a snarled, tangled mess because I did not have the concept of looking in a mirror to groom myself down until I was 17 or so. I was chased by peers and mocked, and I would freeze like a cornered animal. My parents were too caught up in their own bullshit to do anything except make fun of me every once in a while. That is what being free to be autistic is to me. Sure, I talked excessively about my special interests every once in a while, but my memories of being completely in my own little world, it's not like I even remember who I was spewing the animal facts at, and I got very little satisfaction out of it. It was much more like a compulsion. Can someone please explain to me what these enjoyable aspects of autism are? I feel proud that I can mask so well, considering I had to learn it, painfully, by myself, one step at a time. The whole masking debate is weird. Yes, it is exhausting and almost always disappointing because no matter how hard you try, you will still end up making mistakes. But I still want to try, because if I don't hide the worst traits of being autistic, then I'll be a person I don't want to be. Like it or not, there are social rules everyone has to follow, and if we don't, we are seen as rude, inconsiderate, selfish, weird, and or stupid. I don't want to go into public wearing ear defenders and see people's looks of confusion, or understanding, and then pity. I don't want to keep talking over people and dominating conversations with my nonsense and have them respond badly. I definitely don't want to melt down in front of anyone because thrashing, screaming, clawing, and biting in a 25-year-old is not acceptable. Even when it's my neurological response to extreme stress. I did my time of being the autistic kid in school. Thankfully I wasn't bullied too much for it because it was a girls' school and my breakdown was so bad and disturbing I don't think I could have even been a target. There were probably things said behind my back, but if I don't have to hear it, then I don't care. I've been lucky enough now to find people who say I don't have to mask around them. But trying to stop masking just causes more stress because I don't know how to behave if I'm not constantly trying to control myself. Though I do see some positives to being autistic, I believe it's made me smart and logical. I also think it's made me kinder and more resilient because of the struggles I've been through. I wouldn't wish myself not autistic because then I wouldn't be me. I'm proud not of my autism, but of the person it's made me into. I would love it if people could accept others for who they are, but society just isn't there yet, and I refuse to be a martyr for progress. It's not my role to sacrifice my well-being to educate the ignorant. I spend a lot of time on Reddit. Likely too much, but the younger demographic combined with the toxic positivity worries me. You don't need to mask, society is the one who is wrong is a nice thought, but being an early adopter of radical self-acceptance is the recipe for a very difficult existence. So many of these people who refuse to compromise their self-expression are horribly bitter because they expect the world to cater to them, not just accept them. I mean stuff like people demanding to never be romantically rejected, or asked to tone down difficult behaviors. Of course society could be more tolerant, but society is teamwork, not any one group getting their way. Low-effort white men in America. Reddit chic observation notwithstanding, which, even while partly true, is proof that it's a bad thing when any one group's rights are prioritized. Encouraging shame in those who can mask seems pretty wrong, too. Individualism is the whole point, isn't it? Or is only quirky individualism allowed? Encouraging shame in those who can mask seems pretty wrong, too. Individualism is the whole point, isn't it? Or is only quirky individualism allowed? I'm not mad at you or anything, you do have great points. Having grown up in the 90s, nobody knew from autism, and I took one look at the main talking points of the support groups, and was glad for missing out on it. I could probably get a lot from a more realistic, grounded support environment. I just feel bad being excluded by my own people because I am happy that I can engage with society without fear due to the tools I have developed. Thanks for giving me your viewpoint. I'm totally cool being weird because I know I'll never be completely normal, but I have come very far. Plus being weird isn't a bad thing having grown up in Southern California / Southern Californialite, Las Vegas. Or Space Last Samurai. I hate when people call is space Pocahontas because so many movies have this theme. Westerner falls in love with natives he was sent to fight, becomes one of them. That's not a unique plot and Pocahontas didn't create it. Yes, it follows the theme many movies follow, but it's still an interesting movie with breathtaking visuals that still take about today. If Avatar is just Pocahontas in space, then Pocahontas is just animated dances with wolves. I watched When a Stranger Calls a few hours before babysitting. The house was in the middle of nowhere, no neighbors for miles, and had big glass windows at the front of the house. It was also a very blustery night, and the parents of the kids I was babysitting forgot to mention that if the front door isn't locked it will blow open in strong winds. Still waiting for my soul to return. I spent the rest of the night crawling on my belly when I needed to go through the front of the house so no murderers could see me from outside. I think the main problem I had with it was that the only way to move the plot along seemed to be to have an explosion interrupt what they were doing. It's like they ran out of ideas about how they would introduce the next thing. It's like they knew the actual plot didn't have enough tension and momentum of its own, so they had to have another explosion to keep up the pace. I still actually kinda liked it, though. I walked out of that film so disappointed. Felt like a group of executives had gathered in a room and gone, this thing has worked well with this demographic in focus groups, so we'll add it in, but for every little thing, and it just felt lame. Walking out though, I overheard so many people talking about how much they liked it, so they must have been doing something right. The DC Aquaman animated film was way better and a lot shorter. In fact, DC animated films have been consistently great to watch whilst the live-action films have flopped. Funny since the animated films came first and they could have easily replicated those into live action, but they just fuck it up every time.